Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. Two women, both named Mary Morris, both murdered in Houston within 3 days of each other in October 2000. One was a bank loan officer found beaten, shot, and burned in her car. The other, a nurse who made a frantic 911 call before being found shot to death in her vehicle. Was it a bizarre coincidence? Or did someone kill the wrong Mary Morris first, then finish the job with their intended target? Or perhaps something even more sinister? Today, we dive into one of Houston's most perplexing unsolved cases, where having the wrong name at the wrong time may have proven deadly. Let's begin our journey into the Mary Morris murders. On the morning of October 12, 2000, a jogger discovered a horrific scene along a remote stretch of road in West Houston, Texas. Inside a burning car was the body of a woman, later identified as 39-year-old Mary Henderson Morris. The discovery would mark the beginning of one of Houston's most perplexing criminal cases, a case that would soon become even more mysterious with another murder just 3 days later. Mary Henderson Morris was a loan officer at a bank in Houston. She was known to her friends and family as a dedicated professional, a loving wife to her husband Mike, and a devoted mother to their daughter Marilyn. That Thursday morning began like any other. Mary left her home early to head to work. When she didn't arrive at the bank and failed to answer her cell phone, her colleagues became concerned. The burning vehicle was spotted around 7:30 a.m. near the intersection of Westview and Gessner Road, in an area that wasn't on Mary's normal route to work. Firefighters who responded to the scene made the grim discovery of her body inside. Initial investigations revealed that Mary had been beaten and shot before her car was set on fire, presumably to destroy evidence. Detective Sergeant Eric Mail of the Houston Police Department was assigned to the case. It was immediately clear that this wasn't a random act of violence, he would later say in interviews. The level of brutality suggested something personal. As police began their investigation, they looked into Mary's life, searching for any conflicts or enemies that might have wanted to harm her. But by all accounts, Mary Henderson Morris led a quiet, drama-free existence. She had no known enemies, wasn't involved in any disputes, and had no significant debts or legal troubles. The case seemed to lack an obvious motive. Her husband Mike Morris was devastated by the news. He had last seen his wife that morning when she left for work. Phone records confirmed that he had tried calling her multiple times when she didn't arrive at the bank. Colleagues vouched for his whereabouts that morning, and he quickly provided DNA samples and fingerprints to police to aid in their investigation. Then, just as detectives were beginning to gather evidence in Mary Henderson Morris's murder, a shocking development occurred. On October 15, 2000, just 3 days after the first murder, another woman named Mary Morris was found dead in her car in northwest Houston. This second victim, Mary McGinnis Morris, was 48 years old and worked as a nurse at a local medical center. Like the first Mary Morris, she too had been shot to death in her car. However, there were key differences in the crime scenes. Mary McGinnis Morris had been found in her own Dodge Intrepid near her workplace. Her vehicle hadn't been set on fire, and there were signs of a struggle inside the car. The coincidence was striking. Two women with the same name, killed in the same city, within days of each other. The similarities didn't end there. Both women were professional, middle-aged, and married. Both were found dead in their vehicles, and both had the first name Mary and the last name Morris. Detective Mel, who was now handling both cases, told reporters, "We're looking at every angle, including the possibility that these two murders are connected. But we're also considering that this could be a bizarre coincidence." Mary McGinnis Morris's husband, Jay, was also quickly investigated. Like Mike Morris in the first case, Jay Morris cooperated with police and provided alibi information. He had been at home with the couple's teenage daughter at the time of the murder. As investigators dug deeper into the second Mary Morris case, they discovered something intriguing. Unlike the first victim, Mary McGinnis Morris had expressed concerns about her safety in the days leading up to her death. She had told friends and family that she felt uneasy about a new maintenance worker at her office who seemed to be watching her. She had even called her husband on the day of her murder, sounding distressed, saying she was being followed. Additionally, police found that Mary McGinnis Morris had made a frantic 911 call just before her death. In the recording, she could be heard screaming and struggling with someone. The call ended abruptly, and when police arrived at the location traced from her cell phone, they found her dead in her car. The medical examiner's report provided more details about both murders. Mary Henderson Morris had died from a gunshot wound to the head, though she had also been beaten severely before being shot. Mary McGinnis Morris had also been shot, but there were defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she had fought with her attacker. As news of the two murders spread throughout Houston, a theory began to emerge among both investigators and the public. What if the second Mary Morris had been killed by mistake? What if the real target had been the first Mary Morris, and the killer, realizing their error, had gone after the intended victim 3 days later? This theory gained traction when investigators discovered that the two women lived only a few miles apart in northwest Houston. They didn't know each other and moved in different social circles, but their paths could have potentially crossed. More importantly, their names, identical except for their middle names, could have easily been confused by someone planning a murder. Detective Mail acknowledged this possibility in a press conference. We're exploring the theory that the second murder may have been committed to cover up the mistake of the first, or vice versa. But we're not ruling out any possibilities at this stage. The investigation into Mary Henderson Morris's life continued to yield few leads. She and her husband had been married for 20 years, and by all accounts, they had a stable, loving relationship. Financial records showed no unusual activities. Her colleagues described her as well-liked and professional. There simply wasn't an obvious reason why anyone would want to harm her. The second Mary Morris's case, however, began to reveal more potential motives. Mary McGinnis Morris had recently had conflicts at work. She managed a medical office and had fired an employee a few months before her death. This employee had reportedly made threatening comments afterward. Additionally, her relationship with her husband Jay had been strained, according to friends who spoke to investigators. Jay Morris's alibi for the time of his wife's murder was solid. He had been at home with their daughter and had phone records to prove he had been making calls from their landline during the critical time period. Still, detectives noted that it would have been possible to hire someone to commit the murder. The fired employee from Mary McGinnis Morris's workplace was thoroughly investigated. He had a criminal record for assault and had made specific threats against Mary. However, he also had an alibi for the time of the murder, as he had been seen by multiple witnesses at a different location. As weeks turned into months, the investigation continued, but progress was slow. Forensic evidence from both scenes was analyzed, but results were inconclusive. DNA found in Mary McGinnis Morris's car didn't match any known suspects. Fingerprints recovered from Mary Henderson Morris's vehicle were mostly destroyed in the fire. The families of both victims were desperate for answers. Mike Morris, husband of the first victim, told reporters, "My wife was the gentlest person you could ever meet. She didn't have enemies. This makes no sense." Jay Morris, husband of the second victim, maintained his innocence while pushing police to look at the workplace angle. Mary had been worried about that man at work. She felt threatened by him. "I believe he's responsible for what happened to her." 1 year after the murders, the Houston Police Department held a press conference to update the public on the cases. Detective Mail admitted that despite extensive investigation, they were no closer to making an arrest in either case. "We're still actively investigating both murders," he said. "We believe someone out there knows something that could help us solve these cases." The mistaken identity theory remained compelling. Criminal profilers consulted on the case suggested that the specific circumstances, two women with the same name killed within days of each other, was too coincidental to ignore. However, they couldn't determine with certainty which Mary Morris had been the intended target and which had been killed by mistake. Some evidence pointed to Mary Henderson Morris being the intended victim all along. The brutal nature of her murder and the attempt to destroy evidence by burning her car suggested a crime of passion or a professional hit. In contrast, Mary McGinnis Morris's murder showed signs of a struggle and seemed less planned. Other evidence suggested the opposite, that Mary McGinnis Morris was the intended target. She had expressed fear for her safety, had conflicts at work, and there was that troubling 911 call indicating she knew she was in danger. Mary Henderson Morris, on the other hand, seemed to have no enemies or conflicts in her life. As the investigation continued, detectives looked into both women's pasts, searching for any connections or common acquaintances. They examined phone records, financial transactions, and interviewed dozens of people who knew either woman. Despite these efforts, no clear connection between the two Mary Morrises ever emerged. 3 years after the murders, the cases remained unsolved, but investigators had developed several theories. One involved Mary McGinnis Morris's workplace conflict. The fired employee remained a person of interest, though evidence against him was circumstantial at best. Another theory focused on Jay Morris, the second victim's husband. Though he had an alibi, investigators discovered that the couple had a life insurance policy worth $700,000. Friends also revealed that the marriage had been troubled, with discussions of divorce arising in the months before Mary's death. Mike Morris, husband of the first victim, was largely ruled out as a suspect. His alibi was solid, and there appeared to be no motive for him to want his wife dead. Financial investigations showed no irregularities, and the couple had appeared to have a happy marriage. In 2005, 5 years after the murders, the Houston Police Department reclassified both cases as cold, though they remained open. Detective Mail, who had since been promoted, told local media, "These cases still haunt me. Two women with the same name, killed within days of each other. It's either an incredible coincidence or something more sinister. Either way, two families deserve answers." The families of both women continued to push for justice. Mike Morris established a small scholarship in his wife's name at a local community college where she had taken classes. Jay Morris and his daughter eventually moved away from Houston, seeking a fresh start away from the painful memories. Forensic technology continued to advance in the years following the murders. In 2010, investigators re-examined DNA evidence from Mary McGinnis Morris's car using newer techniques. They were able to develop a more complete DNA profile of an unknown individual, though it didn't match anyone in criminal databases. The 911 call made by Mary McGinnis Morris just before her death was also reanalyzed using enhanced audio technology. Experts were able to clarify some of the background noises and determined that a male voice could be heard during the struggle. However, the voice was too distorted to be identified or compared to any suspects. In 2015, 15 years after the murders, a true crime television show featured the cases, bringing renewed attention to the Mary Morris murders. The show presented the various theories and included interviews with family members and investigators. Following the broadcast, the Houston Police Department received several new tips, though none led to a breakthrough. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case remained the timing, just 3 days between the murders. If the mistaken identity theory was correct, it suggested the killer realized their error quickly and acted to correct it. Criminal psychologists noted that this behavior was unusual for both professional hitmen and crimes of passion. If it was a hired killer who got the wrong Mary Morris first, why not just report back to whoever hired them that the job was done? Asked Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist who reviewed the case for a criminology journal. And if it was personal, the killer would likely know their target well enough not to make such a mistake. The 3-day gap is what makes this case so unusual. Another peculiar element was the difference in murder methods. Mary Henderson Morris had been beaten before being shot, and her car was set on fire, suggesting a crime meant to eliminate evidence and possibly expressing rage. Mary McGinnis Morris showed signs of having fought her attacker and was simply shot, potentially indicating a struggle that ended with the killer using the gun out of necessity rather than plan. By 2020, both cases remained officially unsolved. The Houston Police Department's cold case unit still revisited the files periodically, especially when new forensic techniques became available. DNA samples were preserved in the hope that future technology or expanded databases might one day provide a match. The families of both Mary Morrises had found different ways to cope with their loss and the lack of closure. Mike Morris eventually remarried, but continued to honor his first wife's memory through the scholarship fund. Their daughter Marilyn, who was a teenager when her mother was killed, became an advocate for victims' rights. Jay Morris maintained a lower profile. He rarely spoke publicly about his wife's murder after the initial years of investigation. His daughter, too, chose privacy as she built her adult life away from the shadow of her mother's unsolved murder. The Mary Morris murders, as they came to be known in Houston, left a lasting impact on the community and on the investigators who worked the cases. The bizarre coincidence, or calculated connection, between the two deaths continues to perplex criminal justice professionals and true crime enthusiasts alike. Detective Mail, who retired from the Houston Police Department in 2018, gave an interview to a local newspaper on the 20th anniversary of the murders. In 40 years of police work, the Mary Morris cases stand out as the most unusual I ever investigated, he said. I still think about those women and their families. I still believe these cases can be solved. The most compelling evidence in Mary McGinnis Morris's case remains the 911 call she made in her final moments. The terror in her voice and the sounds of struggle provide a haunting audio document of her murder. Investigators believe that if the person whose voice can be faintly heard in the background could be identified, it would likely solve at least one of the murders. For Mary Henderson Morris, the key evidence was largely destroyed in the fire. However, investigators preserved bullet fragments recovered from her body. These could potentially be matched to a weapon if one were ever recovered in connection with either case. As of today, the Mary Morris murders remain one of Houston's most enduring criminal mysteries. 2 women with the same name, killed within days of each other, with no apparent connection between them. Was one killed by mistake? Were both targeted intentionally? Were the murders related at all, or was it truly just a bizarre coincidence? These questions continue to drive occasional media coverage and periodic reviews of the evidence. Cold case detectives in Houston have stated that both files remain open, and they continue to follow up on any new leads that emerge. The families of both women still hope for resolution, even as the decades pass. The Mary Morris murders serve as a reminder of the limitations of criminal investigations, the enduring pain of unsolved cases, and the strange, sometimes inexplicable nature of violent crime. In a city that has seen its share of notorious murders, the deaths of these 2 women with the same name continue to stand out for their peculiar circumstances and the questions they leave behind.